Okay, so we're standing on the side of a river, okay, and we're looking into the river, but if we stand and we look straight down at our feet, the rocks are not distorted. The minute we start looking that way, they start getting oblique and distorted. And then as we move towards the bank, we start getting glare from the sun on the river. Okay, so this river is not moving very fast. And we start getting these little glare things, which is the light reflecting off the water. Okay. So what we've got to remember is underneath those reflections, we've still got rocks, but we can't see them because there's a scientific reason, because there is just so much movement of light coming into the water that the vision of the rocks is gone. So where we do not have the glare, we can see the rocks. So how do we transfer that into a watercolor painting? Therein lies the problem. So we're going to try today just to have a sort of like a process, so that next week you can choose your own picture. It doesn't have to be that one, and you will then compose your own picture of underwater rocks in a moving river. Now, the more the river is moving, the more you're going to get ripples and the more glares you're going to get. So that is obviously quite a still river, like if you were at Seven Springs and you were just looking down into the water. So you can also see from that how the rocks that are closer to you are more true to form. As they move away from you, they change. Okay. So that's sort of what we're trying to do. So I'm hoping that sort of portrays what I'm planning. And I have very quickly just drawn some rocks, very, very quickly. I have wet my glass, and I am wetting everything except the dry part of my biggest rock. So if you look at my picture, that part is going to be dry. Everything else is underwater. Okay? So I am not wetting my dry rock because generally, it does depend on the kind of rock that the rock is made of, or the material that it's made of. Generally, wet rocks are darker than dry rocks. Right, so luckily Peter brought this plate back because I knew I was a bit short on space. So I'm starting with some cerulean, and I'm going to put a little bit of cobalt into it, okay? And then on the other side, I'm going to mix up some burnt sienna. Yeah, that wasn't any coffee. And a touch of ultramarine blue.
Can I just ask?
Yeah?
Just trying to still get there. Why the cerulean cobalt?
Because you could just use the cobalt, but the cerulean just adds a prettiness to it. It's a colder blue than the cobalt, so that's the reason. Right, so what I'm doing is, that is still nice and wet. I haven't stuck it down because I didn't really want it to warp. Make sure that that's still visible. And I am literally, might need a bit more colour. You see how it's nice and wet? I'm not allowing it to go into my dry rock. And I'm not doing a flat wash, okay? So as we come forward, I'm bringing some of that blue forward. Now, the distinction between the blue and the brown is quite important, which you will see in a minute, because the blue becomes the reflection. So the blue becomes the light, or the rocks that we see through light. Right, so I'm picking up some of my brown, and I'm going to put a bit of yellow in there as well. Hi Basil. Right, and we're just literally plonking this in. That's better. Now, why doesn't Jensen bark at Basil, but he barks at Pete? Right, so that is the dry portion of the rock. That is the wet portion of the rock. Notice now that I'm actually putting some of that browny color further back. Okay? And I want it all to bleed together. Right, so here's a bit more. More color in there. I don't want to paint it, I want the paper to paint it, and the water. Probably enough. Okay, so that is stage one. Put a bit of raw sienna in there, just to change. Can you see already the rocks that are here are already looking further away, and right. Okay, now the problem comes in that we're going to have to dry it, because I can't carry on until we do that, so I shall put that on. Right. Okay, so that's now dry, and I'm going to re-wet the whole thing again. Well, why did you dry it? Because I'm glazing, okay? So in order to glaze, you need to have the underneath totally dry. If you don't have it totally dry, the paint that you put on second is going to merge into the first layer. And I'm not actually totally sure that that is dry enough. Even though it feels dry, it probably isn't, but for the purposes of today, it's going to be. So, yeah, I've got no choice, it just has to be, because you're standing waiting and your coffee's finished. Now I can see that I'm already lifting some of that paint because it's not properly dry, okay? If it was properly dry, it wouldn't be lifting. I am using a very, very soft brush, but it's still lifting, okay, because it's not properly dry. But
why doesn't the layer underneath start re-wetting itself?
If it's properly dry, it won't, unless you go.
Yeah.
But if you just very gently go with a damp or wet brush and do that, it will not. Okay, now I am getting some, you can see that it wasn't properly dry, but I'm going to have to go with it. Okay, because I'm trying to do this quite, I should have done Blue Peter and done part one, dry plot, that's one, you know. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to get a bit of texture into those rocks. And we're going to make a slightly thicker mix. And we're just going to put some splatter in, and if it goes into the dry rock, it's okay. So the wetter this mixes, and I'm still only using the same colours, but we do need to get some texture in those rocks. Okay. I don't want that dry brush texture in there, so I'm just going to rocks, but also showing where our stones are. Now, not all of us can imagine where these little triangular things should go. So if in doubt, just draw them in. And the other thing that I'm going to say is we do not want all of these little triangular shapes to be the same color. So in other words, we don't want them all the same thickness. We're not going to mix up a teaspoonful of dark and use that dark to paint all of them. So that is sort of where we're going. Okay. I've got a rock in there. So it's basically burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. And I quite like, these are round rocks. So I'm painting it in. And I'm either putting in a touch of blue or a touch of water. The trick here is that they are darker here and getting lighter as we go further away from us. So if you look at that picture, they are darker here and they get lighter as we go further away. Okay? So the easiest thing to do is probably look at your foreground rocks first, because I can't see many. I'm going to have to draw some in. There's one in there. So, a bigger brush for that one. We do not want, if our spaces are too big between the rocks, that's when we need to create some smaller rocks. Because if you look at the picture, there are lots and lots of little rocks in between the small ones. And we can't necessarily see all of them, so sometimes we've only got half a rock showing.
What if you haven't got many spaces in between?
You might have to create some.
Right.
Okay, so that's what we're doing. There's another rock. So I'm negatively painting rocks. My rock is going to finish in here. And I will put this video together, so you will be able to have another look at it over the weekend.
So, sorry, I'm being a bit remedial. Are you looking at your original rock shapes underneath, or are you making them up now?
No, I'm looking at my original rock shapes underneath,
Okay.
basically.
Because I don't know what happens if you can't see them.
Then you've got to draw them in so that you can see them. Oops, sorry. Okay, now I can't see a lot of mine. There is one here. Don't know where it went to. Okay, and there's one in there. There's one there. There's one there, one there, one there. So I've got a gap in here. Now I might decide so there's my Angela's doing a very good job at. Okay, can you see how by adding more water to my plate, my wash is automatically getting lighter as I'm going further north? Unfortunately, my stones are becoming all the same size, which is not what they're supposed to do. So we'll have some teeny weeny ones. So it's quite dark. If you pick up paint and you find it's too wet, so in other words, if it just like explodes off your brush and onto the paper, just touch your wad and pick up some thicker paint. And if you've got no thicker paint because it's all too wet, then just pick up some stronger pigment and just put it in. Now, all these rocks are going to be repainted, so this is not the finished thing. All we're doing is defining our rocks. Right, so we're going to go all the way up. Adding, because I've got this is quite clean, so I'm adding water to it all the time. If in doubt, I'll check on there. And I'm basically painting those little triangles. And I don't always have to paint. See there, I've painted half a rock. I haven't painted the full rock. I thought I might just put a little bit of darker in the corner and in there. Okay. Right. That rock is going to come in there. So I'll just put, you do need a brush with a nice point. It's too much water. So I'll just pick it up. Now there's a trick here. Where I have got brown, I basically paint with my brown mix. Where I have got blue, I paint with my blue. Okay, so the blue is where we have more light coming through and we can't see as well. So I've got brown in here. So I'm just going to put in some, just to show you. So I've drawn in a couple, and here is my weak blue, because we don't want it too strong. If it's too strong, I'm going to have to wash it out.
Is it the same blue we used?
It's exactly the same blue. Now, you know the thing about the flowers? Remember? And I said, oh, lots of technique. Look, you can't actually see my line. Okay, so I haven't made that any darker. So I've just put in lots and lots of water. Right, so this is a bit more brown. So it's got more silt. I'm looking through more silt. So I'll just put a bit more in there. And I'm carving my rocks out. I want to put a little bit more because I want to define those rocks. And wash it out. Now, because that's wet, I can't paint the rocks up there, okay? That there is going to be a glare, so it's very, very light, so I'm not going to paint a rock in there, but I'll paint a rock next to it. So just, that rock is now underwater. I might just put a bit darker blue in there. Just let it bleed. It will be there, but it's not. Soften that edge. Okay, and then I'll come back over here. So I'm dancing around all the time to get these shapes in. And it's a good idea to stand up and look at them. See where they're going. If you put in a shape and you think, oh, golly, that's far too dark, what's the easiest way to make it light?
Water.
Just add some water. Add a drop of water and it'll lighten it. Can you see how I'm starting to build that up? So that is our next job, is to, don't want too many shapes in there. Start putting in, I'm going to break that up. Shall I show you now? Mm-hmm. Yeah, what? Okay, step too far. I am going to wet this rock. So this is actually next week's project. And I am going to, voila, instead of one rock, I now have two. So that's how we're going to work. The hardest part is this section up here, because it's remembering that the light is different. As the water is moving over the rocks, so the light changes, but the rocks are also changing shape, and I'm not really clever enough to work that out, but you see how they're becoming much softer, more diluted already. These down here are closer to me, and the edges are a lot crisper, and they're getting further away, they're getting softer. But once you put another glaze over here, all this is going to change further forward, and they will go softer. Now, I've painted that one in. I can't go and paint another one there yet because it's wet. So I don't want to interfere with the wetness. I might just put in a bit of blue. So by putting in that blue, what have I done? I've made that rock stand out. Okay? You see where I'm going? I've sort of lost that rock a bit, but that's okay, it'll come back. I'm going to have
There's in the picture here.
some rocks, but they're quite... Right, so all that is on my brownie side, which is why I had that brown in there. Okay, and bring it down. Just negatively paint. When it gets too wet, I have to stop. But I'm getting the effect that they are far away, which is what we're all about. So, that's where we're going.
Okay.
Thanks. So once we've got our splatter and some sort of texture in it, we're going to start putting some shading in our rocks. And it's now that the one rock will start standing out from the other. So the easiest way to do it is we are going to, I'm going to make that one in there. So I'm going to wet the rock with my paintbrush. Okay, so I've seen the shape. If you can't see your shapes and you want to draw them in, draw them back in. And then I'm going to try and keep my colours clean. So in other words, I don't really want to mix my colours and then put them in, because if I mix my colours, I'm going to lose the transparency. So you decide how light you want the top of the rock. But basically what I'm doing is I am painting in the shadow of one rock against the other so that they start to stand out. So I'm going to put in a little bit of the blue as well. That's my cobalt up there. Okay, so into my ultramarine, I'm putting my blue. I'm not mixing it on my tile. And I also don't want a white line against that rock. Can you see the fingers I'm getting? Can you see how it's just spreading naturally? If I think I've got too much water, I'll just lift it up with the tip of my brush, touch my wad. And I'm very gently just bringing it down to the base of the rock. Now, at this point, if you wanted to, you could put in salt, you can put in anything you like, but that is just another... We're not doing that. That's not part of the process that I'm showing you. You can if you want to. Right, so I can't paint that rock, and I can't paint that rock because they are touching a wet edge of this one. So I'm going to re-wet that one. Start off with my burnt sienna again. Doing exactly the same thing, and I can decide how far up I want it to go. I'm just making sure I've got no white lines around the rocks, okay? And then my blue again, I'll put a bit of cerulean in it, why not? Just drop it in. So the longer I wait, the better my fingers are going to be. So I've got a lot of pigment and water hanging around the surface of this rock. So I'm not doing this with my brush. All I'm doing is I'm touching the surface with the point of my brush and just transferring that to where I want it to go. Now, I also have to do all my little rocks. So same thing, I'm going to wet the rock. And I am going to use a little bit of this gunginess just for the base. So I don't want all my rocks to be pretty. So there's job done, okay? I still can't paint that one, and I still can't paint that one. I could do that one. No, I can't, because it's touching there, and that one's touching here. So, that's dry there. Let's do some of these that are further back. So again, I am putting some water on, and I'm just picking up. Remember that the trick here is if you are painting onto your brownie part, in other words, the part that's got a lot of sediment, use your sediment color, your brownie color, or your gray. If you're painting on blue, use the blue, because that will keep the reflection of the light going. Now, I actually want a little bit of that to be slightly darker. Remember, this is all going to dry, it's going to go lighter, and we're going to put a glaze over the whole thing. Right, I want to do the skirt of my rock that is half in the water and half out of the water. So I'm just going to quickly dry this. Right, so I'm doing the skirt, so the part of the rock, and I'm using my muckiness from underneath. And all I'm doing is painting the skirt for now. So this is the part of the rock that's underwater. And I might actually just that's it. So I'm actually going over some of those darker shapes that I painted, just so that it doesn't look cut out. And then I'm going to pick up a bit more of my cobalt. This is a very professional videographer here. She might have got herself a job.
Wait till you see it.
And I'm going to start putting in a bit more colour. Just ad hoc, wherever I want it, whatever I want to show up. Right. Just letting it all just bleed in. Okay. And then I'm going to take my teeny brush, and I don't know what this colour is. It's something. It's just helping me get it dark. It's a muck. I don't know what it is. I've no idea. I should actually put this whole thing in the wash. Alright, so I've got it dark, and I'm going to run this line just on the edge while it's wet. And I'm doing this so that when I come to put my white in, well, it's not going to be white, it's going to be blue, it stands out better. Okay? You see already that the difference is standing out between the one and the other. So if we look on my picture, I have not painted that in yet. I've only done from there to there. Okay, so I've just put in a little dark line, and I could probably, just for the purposes of this, remember that a dry rock, depending on what it's made of, is generally lighter when it's dry than when it's wet. So I'll just put a bit of colour in there. I don't want to touch that white line, but that will be alright in the end. So I'm just putting a bit of colour into that rock for now. Okay, it's going to be drier. So that is where we're going to. I'm not sure how dry that is, so I'll just reiterate. All the rocks need to be re-wet individually. I'm not sure, I think it's okay, so I will re-wet. Try not to, I've actually put a bit of ultramarine in there, anyway. Try not to take from your mixed colours. I know sometimes it's not easy and sometimes we just think, oh, well, that will do. I want dark and light. You see how that's lightened so much already. Okay, try putting the burnt sienna on first and then the blue on the top, and then the blue one first and the burnt sienna on the top. So if I take that burnt sienna and just look at the difference that I actually get, and there is a difference. So for next week, we will have all our rocks shaded in. What I am going to do is I'm going to put that last little bit on this rock, not the white. And Carol went paddling. So when you distort the water by putting something in or a dog running into it, the level of the water against the rocks changes. And where the water comes down again, you're left with a section of the rock that is still damp. So that's what we're going to paint in now. And I am going to just take from my muddiness here. No. Okay, so I was going to use that teeny weeny brush because I like my teeny weeny brush, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to turn that slightly and I'm going to use a bigger brush, put a bit more of the burnt sienna in. I'm hoping my darker line is dry, and I'm literally creating, and it doesn't have to be dead straight. Don't really want it to be too crooked because that's not going to look right. So that is where somebody went paddling, and that part of the rock is underwater, that part is damp, and that part is dry. So that's where we're going to for next week. And then we will get that little line in next week. Oh, what I wanted to show you before you go, you see, this is my cerulean. You see how that's settled? If I go back in now, and it's still wet, but it's settled. Look how I can just spot. Okay, and those fingers will keep moving depending on how wet my paper is. I've got a dry brush mark there, a dry line. Do I want it? Not sure. I'll just get rid of it. There we are. Actually, I quite like that one. So I will go and put, now I'm going a step too far. Okay. So that's where we're going.